Hi, everyone. My name is Brandi Hoyos. I'm so excited to connect and engage with you all today because as I was talking to Nicole, I'm like, tell me a little bit about yourself. And she said, we're just a really fun group. And I was really affirmed in that when I went to your website. And I was just so incredibly impressed by the level of creativity that you all use and how you approach engagement and learning, some of your costumes, dressing up like a royal court. As you know, my background is Game of Thrones, so I thought, okay, I can be House of Hoyos. I'll be the Khaleesi today because I just didn't have a costume on hand and I wanted to make it somewhat reflective of how you normally have a session. And seeming how I'm going to be kicking it off, I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to be talking about courageous consciousness of diversity, equity, inclusion. So let's just go ahead and start kicking it off. So I know that, oh, and let me pause and say to Nicole and Matt, I do not have access to kind of let people in. So if you have people who are in the waiting room, maybe the times that we have breakout rooms, I can let them in as well, okay? So again, I have 15 plus years in DEI work. I've worked with corporations, nonprofits, organizations, and schools and foundations. And I just love really meeting people where they are. I think it's so important, especially with this work, as you're building vulnerability and really talking about things that are very personal in a professional space. It's important to meet people where they are so that growth can occur. So I really wanted to take a step back and do kind of a fun spark. A spark is another way of saying an icebreaker, because I think sparks often really encourage creativity and engagement. And so I want to kind of talk about like who you are as a team member, because self-awareness is a key component of being a strong team member. And Deloitte found that organizations weren't getting the type of performance that they needed. So leaders have to be able to identify and learn to leverage and work with different working styles on their teams. So all of which bring valuable and necessary diversity to the work environment. Existing personality tests, again, they just weren't doing it. So Deloitte came up with their own personal one and wanted to kind of take a closer look at that. So here we have 4 different categories. We have a pioneer, a driver, an integrator, and a guardian. The pioneers, who are in yellow, they really value possibility. They spark energy and imagination on teams. They believe that risks are worth taking, and it's fine to go with your gut, right? So they also focus on the big picture, and they're drawn to new ideas and bold approaches. The drivers, which are in the red, they value challenge and generate momentum. They're about getting results and kind of a little competitive. So they tend to view issues as black and white when they tackle problems head on, so they're not afraid of that, and they're armed with logic and data. So an integrator in green, they really value connection and draw teams together. Relationships and responsibility to the group are absolutely paramount. They tend to believe most things are relative, and they're very diplomatic and focused on gaining consensus. And last but not least, in blue are the guardians, and they value stability. They bring order and rigor. They're pragmatic. They really kind of hesitate to embrace risk. Data and facts are baseline requirements, and details definitely matter. They believe that it makes sense to learn from the past. So another fun way of looking at that would be to kind of see this video, and I want to share it.
I see my team around this table, so much to give, but they're not able. If there could be better chemistry, then together we're trying to work here. Where are the facts? It's all fluff, it's all feeling. Let's triple check and perfect. Are you kidding? Here's an idea. That's not clear. It's all theory. So many sides, can't decide. Let's take a chance. Run the numbers. Can we agree? Wait and see. What a bummer. What if we stop wasting time? A brainstorm. Just perform. Let's take turns. Enthusiastic, fantastic. On Facebook, you song bombastic. I'm coming up with all the possibilities. It's only one of my abilities. I'm fired up, I'm restless. Let's work with it. Adapt to every moment. I choose a lot of spending time. My focus. Hey, was that a squirrel? imagination. Oh, implementation. Well, maybe not. It's the most details for me. No one knows what to control me. I have to pass another show and have the whole world waiting. Waiting, never late. Things must be just so. Be just so. Check everything twice, don't mix it up. Put things in a place, don't interrupt. Keep it all contained, don't blow it up. That's messy. Look into the past and find what's true. Take away the vague, that's what I do. My expertise, my mission. Precision. Stability. See, if we're gonna do it, then we gotta do it right. Y'all still working, I don't wanna be here all night. You gotta get it done. I'm a smart mother, love invention. Figure out a way to work it out for your good intention. Get it done, bring it back to the most. The plans are clear, no need to boast. Pull yourself together, there's no reason to cry. I just go get it. Cause I got a part and I might work it out. Yeah! Look at how the world is connected. We can each play a part when we follow our heart. It's like diplomacy. Listen and you'll see. Realize that we could all work together. Start something better. The same thing that kept us apart could bring us everything we wanted from the start. Maybe we could just all head no and find a road where we can all understand. So what's gonna change when the team is united? Say the word, make it so. Why should we wait? Why should we fight? Just tell me, cause I wanna know. See the possibilities of it, stop bringing me. I know the song. We're gonna work it out. Listen to the day, you know the minute, there's an answer, let's get it. I'm in it to win it. We're ready to win. We have a recipe to love. Chemistry will be so undefeatable. So unique skills. What we match is what we need to make it. We're gonna launch in each and every game with ideas. Teamwork creating, get stuff done. Still out this team around the table. Unity, so much energy. Unity, strength. That's promise. Dang, a lucky stars. We have fantasy. Thank the world, thank team, thank yourself. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we should have taken back to work.
Okay, so I know that we always hear about the diversity in thought, and I thought that maybe we could kind of get in breakout rooms for about 5 minutes and really discuss with your pair or your small group, because we're over 100 and we can only have 50. What do you bring to the table? Are you more a pioneer? Are you a driver? Sorry about that. Are you a driver? Are you an integrator? Or are you a guardian? So I'm going to stop my share for just a second and try to put you all in breakout rooms. Now, Nicole, am I still the host? Because I'm looking for breakout rooms and I don't see that option down here.
Oh, yeah, you are. You have to go to more after reactions. If you hover, you'll see another option and then it'll say, or you can do it through participants.
Okay. Oh, no, I'm going to let these 3 people in.
They missed the video, so they
I
can tease them.
Well, I still don't see that particular function under more. So I guess we'll just kind of roll with it. And just in the chat, if you can just kind of put in there if you're a pioneer, you're a driver, an integrator, or a guardian, and I'll go back to sharing my screen. And I think it's really interesting. I thought the video was really funny because, of course, as we're working in teams, of course, you can think of, oh, that person right over there is a guardian. I mean, like everything is just so neat, or that person is always just a big picture thinker and just not really great with the details, but very definitely a visionary. And sometimes I know that I can be a little bit of the red where I'm like, okay, get to it. Let's go. We've got things to do. So go ahead and put that in there. I see definitely a lot of, yeah, I like that.
Possible you could be a combination, because I didn't really see who
Yeah,
to identify with all of one. So I just did a slash.
for sure. So Nicole, what would you say you are if you were to identify? What two would you say you identify with?
Pioneer and driver.
For sure. Anyone else want to unmute themselves and say what they think that they identify with?
This is Chad. I've been pinging the chat room. I would say I'm probably guardian, but probably somewhere in between guardian and integrator. I don't know if I'm quite all the way guardian.
That's interesting. I kind of see a little bit of that in my home life. If you look at my pantry, I mean, everything is perfectly labeled. I have thing in baskets. Nicole's nodding her head because she knows that's how I am, which I will be honest, when I looked at the website and I saw the level of detail into the Family Feud PowerPoint, in addition to the Price is Right name tags that actually looked like the name tags, that was something that definitely made my crafty heart go pitter patter. So A+ to whoever did that. So I'm just going to continue here. And if you were to ever do this and look on YouTube, this is a great activity that you can do with your team. Some of the questions that you can ask within your team are, what energizes you and in your work environment? What alienates you in your work environment? When might your strengths or perspectives be best leveraged? And what might be challenges that others face in working with you if you are one of the four, or a combination of the four, right? So anytime that we're in this work, it's important to really start to create norms and community agreements. Community agreements allow for a vulnerability to take place because you're really framing the conversation as these are the things that are important to us in order for us to engage in this type of dialogue. So I've put a list of norms and community agreements that I think are a great start. Essentially, if you were in a space, you would join together. If everybody could just mute themselves a little bit, I'm hearing a little bit of background static. I know this is being recorded, so I just don't want that to interfere. Thank you so much. So some of the norms that I put up, in addition to, like I said before, if you were to be in a group environment, you would like to create these norms as a group together. You never ever take away norms, but you can always add to them. And anytime you're engaging in this type of conversation, you would always make sure that the norms are front and center, and you go over them before starting the conversation. So of course, use I statements and speak from your own personal truth. Stay engaged and limit distractions. I think in terms of a Zoom community, I would even say, muting yourself or even just turning on your camera. I think that, as much as we would like to be face-to-face, we'd like to be able to replicate, certain aspects of face-to-face. And a big part of that is just showing your face. I think what we say here stays here, but what we learn here leaves here. So really respecting that confidentiality of personal stories are being shared. Embrace the messiness. Safe conversations can occur where people are uncomfortable. And that's really hard because if you are, let's say, a guardian, you want everyone to be getting along. You want there to be harmony and unity. Practice accountability, the intent versus the impact. It's like if you were to roll over someone's shoe or foot by accident in your car, you wouldn't get out of the car and say, oh my gosh, like, why was your foot even there? I don't even know why you're wincing around in pain. I totally didn't mean it, and you shouldn't be offensive, right? You would come out of the car and you would say, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you all right? I'm so sorry, right? So just really being aware of that impact that may not have been your intention to say something that is offensive. I mean, we're all growing in this work, but really focus on the impact and the person that was impacted. Be aware of equity and voice, move up move back, share the air, because this is kind of more of a sit and get instead of a large group, because I think we're almost at 140 right now. You're probably hearing me talk more than ever, but even in, I was going to say small groups, you can't do that, but moving forward in this type of space, you would always want to be aware of your voice. If you tend to be an observer, really challenge yourself and share your opinion, your perspective when you feel comfortable. Recognize that discomfort often leads to real growth and try not to fix it. That's also kind of embracing that messiness. And keep in mind that everyone is in a different place. This is so incredibly important in this work because we all have started at different times in our lives, both personally and professionally. Expect and accept non-closure. And then finally, listen with the intent to learn. So I want you to go into the participants box. There you'll find a list of names. And I think this is another way that you can utilize more of a relatability when in a Zoom environment. Go ahead and rename yourself, your first name, and then dash maybe a norm or agreement that is something that you want as a reminder to the group. This norm or agreement could be something that you're really, really passionate about, so that when anyone engages with you or sees your name, they know to be aware of that. So for example, if I were to change my name, I may say Brandi dash, everyone is in a different place. That is something that I'm very sensitive to, and I want others to realize that when engaging with me, right? And then normally if the group was a little smaller in the chat, I also like to encourage participants to look at the accountability for themselves, right? So if you look at the norms, you know what norm is something that you maybe have struggles with, right? Is there a stretch for you? I know that I love to talk. I could talk to the wall and figure out a way for it to talk back. So I would type in the chat normally in a smaller group that I know that I need to work on sharing the air and making space for others. And I'll just give you one more minute to kind of rename yourself. And if you don't know how to do it, that's okay. But again, it just allows for that deeper engagement and respect when others are engaging with you.
Hey, Brandi, if you don't mind, we've got a few folks waiting to get in.
Sure. I'll stop share. And I am just admitting 5 people. Oh, got another one.
I love this exercise. I'm learning a whole bunch of stuff about y'all.
Yeah, I think that it's great because, like I said before, it allows for that silent reminder that if someone definitely maybe struggles with trying not to fix it, that allows for that that sense of understanding. If someone kind of wants everyone to get along, you know that they just struggle with that sense of messiness, right? Okay, so for those of you who just came into the chat room, hi, how are you? I'm Brandi Hoyos. It's nice to engage with you. We're just going over our norms and community agreements. And if you could, go ahead and rename yourself and then also put the norm or community agreement that you would like to serve as a reminder to the group as we are engaging with one another. Okay. So I think the important question is, why diversity? What's the value in this work and why should it matter? I think many talented employees and organizations all over the world tell us through focus groups. Some of those focus groups can be BRGs or ERGs, whatever you like to call it, or even affinity groups if you come from academia, that they don't feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. They're just getting by every day, especially right now, given our current social justice movements, and they're just leaving their true talents and deepest passions elsewhere. In any organization where there is this is true, you can bet the bottom line is effective. And when people are actively hiding their deepest truths, their gifts, their unique insights, their struggles and experiences, they aren't fully ready and comfortable to engage and leverage some of those things for their success. Not only does this struggle to fit in diminish like their performance, but it also saps extra energy that would be better spent working toward helping the company or the firm remain like nimble and competitive. The importance of cultivating an inclusive environment where everyone can thrive is only increasing as the world's workforce demographics continue to change. So by 2025, millennials and Generation Zers will be more than 70% of the workforce. And this generation and the generation after them, Generation Z, they have little patience for those organizations and firms and companies that have little diversity or don't even value diversity. So they really expect inclusive workspaces. And if you want to focus on just two characteristics, both generations are both more ethnically and racially diverse than other previous generations. So with these rapidly shifting demographics, all leaders should take notice of the change that is on the horizon. So when companies and leaders fail to cultivate inclusive environments, employees will vote with their feet and they'll leave to seek better, more inclusive options where they're valued and embraced. So also there's a societal call to act. So after witnessing the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many, many more, too many hashtags to name, there's been a shift in awareness of systemic racism and prejudice. And we're witnessing a shift in company cultures as more statements of solidarity and support have surfaced throughout our country. We're witnessing a shift in professional and personal accountability. We're also seeing more and more companies, organizations, firms, schools who are hiring new DEI positions and expanding, maybe an already limited department to show this investment in the work. At one point, like during May, and I want to say April, there were books that were sold out, and some of these resources were shared throughout multiple social media platforms by the millions of views. So the reality that this is the work that has been going on for a while, and I wish that it didn't have to take tragedy and crisis in a pandemic for us to spike this interest. And at the same time, I hope that even when the urgency of this current moment passes, that we continue to do this work. So another term, or I guess, let me go back to, what is it? So when we're unpacking cultural competency, we tend to think of culture. How do we define culture? We normally define it as what is visibly noticed about a person or people, or what my friend Rosetta likes to call the surface signifiers of cultural. It's the 5 F's: the food, the festival, the fun, the flags, and the fashion. And don't get me wrong, these are significant, but culture is so much more deeper than that. The default is race and ethnicity, but there are so many other layers of identity and cultural identifiers internally, externally, and institutionally, such as class, gender, religion, ability, social beliefs, age, nationality, language, body image, and so many more. So let's look at kind of a definition. So cultural competence is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system, institution, or individual and enable that system, institution, or individual to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. So I think that in really breaking down that definition, Stephen Jones has a great 4-point model where he kind of breaks down the cultural aspects, or the aspects of cultural competency. So when we're working on our cultural competence, we're working on a greater sense of self-awareness. What are my core values and how do they show up? How do I engage in things like communication and conflict? And how is that informed by identity, culture, and experience? Also, we're looking at cultural intelligence, and that says, how am I learning about other members of this community and the different perspectives and cultures so that I can learn that my way of doing things is not only the only way of doing things. We're also looking at cross-cultural affective skills. And that says, now that I know that some of these differences, and that I'm aware of them, what skills am I building up? Whether it's communication skills, collaboration skills, conflict resolution skills, so that I can be meaningfully able to interact across difference. And lastly, countering oppression through inclusion. So that kind of says, how do I manage these dynamics of privilege, bias, and isms? Because the reality is, if your company or firm or school is working to improve racial inclusion, then I'm going to speak truth to power. Because ultimately, as a person of color, and I'm speaking of myself, I have perspective and lived experience that I can use to inform this company or school or firm's improvement. But say, for example, if the company or the firm is working to improve inclusivity towards people with physical disabilities, I actually don't expect to be tapped from my perspective, because ultimately I want to elevate the experiences and the voices of people who are actually physically disabled. So all in all, the idea of treating everyone the same actually doesn't always result in fairness, and we need to manage those dynamics so that we're speaking when we need to and stepping back and listening and supporting when others need it. And then we also hear terms like diversity, equity, inclusion. Is it diversity and inclusion? Is it belonging? Is it equity, inclusion? And I really kind of wanted to take apart those 4 terms so that you kind of get an understanding of what those terms mean. So if we're looking at diversity, right? Diversity asks, who is in the room, right? And how many more of whatever inserted like marginalized groups do we want to have more of than maybe last year? Representation, like what is the population of our community and how many people of color do we have, for example? How many leaders are there and leaders of colors do we have? For categories, like what are the demographics of our community? So looking at those numbers, how many people of a racial group do we have this year, right, in comparison to previous years? And looking at, collecting and tracking and reporting of those numbers, right? So the differences, like, do we have enough roles and positions and programs and opportunities that represent these different identities? So inclusion, I would say, takes it a little step further. So in addition to asking, okay, who is in the room? Has everyone been heard? And is the environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? So breaking that down, inclusion says, does everyone experience a sense of belonging? Making sure that we are asking, and saying, I haven't heard from you yet. Like, would you like to speak? So making sure that everyone's voice is included, right? What do you have to say about this? And what would you like to contribute? And I think for marginalized identities, having your voice heard is very, very important. And then also feeling welcomed. So many times I hear people when they describe their work environment, oh, we're like a family. But does everyone share that same feeling? Does it feel like family to everyone? And I think, do people see themselves in windows, mirrors, and doors? And I like to use that analogy because if you think about windows are your perspective outside of yourself, right? Mirrors are how you see yourself reflected. And then the doors will represent opportunity. So if you were to do a visual thinking routine, maybe it's marketing and communication, maybe it's your website, right? If you were to take apart different identities, right? The different cultural identifiers that I listed before and say, okay, as a window or as a mirror, how would a person from this particular group see themselves reflected? And what are the messages that they see? Are they affirming, right? Are they riddled with stereotype threat? And they don't, even with doors, are the doors of opportunity and leadership and the pipeline to success, are they available and are they open to everyone? So now that we know like who's in the room and like who we want to feel included, equity asks, okay, who is trying to get in the room, but who can't? So whose identity in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Do we understand that our organizational structure and culture is rooted in Eurocentric practices? So really understanding those histories, right? Who is structurally left out of the decision-making? Because I think that if you think about it, you'll start to see patterns of there are groups that are left out. How do people silence others in these dialogues? And how is power played out in this community, right? If we're looking at equity, I think says, what conditions do we have that are created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority, right? Or even the perpetual power? Have we accepted that education and therefore opportunities were not designed in its founding for example, people of color, right? What practices do we have in place that keep identities of privilege in power? And I know people are very kind of sensitive about the word privilege, right? And I think that you have to break down and understand that we are all marginalized and privileged in some way. And if you don't think so, look at age, right? If you're under 21, you're either too young to, to vote, to rent a car. You hear, well, you're too young, you don't know anything. You're too young to be in love, right? On the opposite end, right? If you're of a more seasoned age, right? Well, you're too old to learn that sense of technology, right? So those are just examples of how we're marginalized. And then for privilege, I always like to use my own personal example, right? So I am a first generation American with the rights and liberties that were promised to me as an American, even though my parents were born in this country, even though their parents were born in this country and their parents were born in this country, because my parents were born in Mississippi and legalized oppression and segregation. And I'm 38 years old. So there's a certain sense of racial privilege there that I don't share with my white counterpart, okay? So I think in terms of how do we approach this work, I like the term like unpacking the plaque, So, now we have this general idea of like why it's important and like the what, and if you follow Simon Sinek, you may think of like the golden circle of like the why, the how, and the what. But now we only have an hour, and there's so many numerous approaches to this work. But one of the takeaways that I want you to understand is the consistency. So I love this metaphor of like the tonsils of bias that addresses like this consistency. And this was borrowed heavily from Jay Smooth's TED Talk, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Discussing Race. So the tonsils of bias myth teaches us that bias and privilege are like tonsils. We either have them or we don't. And if we get rid of them by having them, then they're removed, which we all know this is a complete myth, right? So under this myth, those who have had some training to understand another's identity and difference assume that they've learned everything that we need to be culturally competent. They might say, I took this workshop on ageism, or I attended this amazing 1-hour session through Atlanta Inn of Court. What else is there to learn? And we have to believe that relationships, and sometimes we believe that relationships can fix these misconceptions about this whole group of people. And we've heard phrases like, I have lots of friends that are X, Y, and Z. There's no way I can be this, right? And I think this myth leaves us slipping into complacency and clinging to a false sense of mastery, reluctant to look for authentic understanding and growth. It makes us think if we just get the right book, if we just find the right professional development workshop or the right speaker, then we can fix all of our problems in the organization. But I think that's important that we adapt this growth mindset. We understand that bias and prejudice, as Jay Smooth likes to put it, is more like plaque, right? There's so much misinformation in the world reinforced by histories and systems and media that if we keep this myth, if we want to keep these myths at bay, we must get into regular practice. And so that practice is much like brushing and flossing our teeth every day. And just as though like in brushing your teeth and flossing every day and good oral hygiene does not guarantee that we'll never have bad breath or that food won't get stuck in our teeth, regular questioning and learning and engaging across difference can only decrease how much our bias and prejudice shows up in our daily thoughts, in our words. And as allies in this work, I think that we accept this reality. And so we keep practicing, we keep brushing, we keep learning, we keep listening, because it's all about the practice. And our organizations and our schools and our firms and our companies, they can have great intentions, they can have powerful missions and mission statements and visions and moving programs, right? But without that regular practice, those elements become more of boxes to check, right? To protect our performative competence and not necessarily that authentic engagement and that authentic investment. So I hope that all the institutions will embrace the growth mindset as a critical component of its cultural competency work, because then only diversity, equity, inclusion will transform from professed values to those actual lived values. So let's unpack the plaque and really work on that. So we hear the term microaggressions, and I think we're familiar for sure with these explicit and those conscious bias, those explicit acts of prejudice and discrimination. And even as lawyers, you rely and utilize bias in your favor. But I
Hey,
really want to talk.
Brandi,
Oh,
I'm going
yes.
to pause you there because we have a few people who want to get in. So since this is a
Oh,
good place to,
sure.
it's a new segment, and I apologize for making you do all this work.
Oh, sorry. And I'm moving because I want to keep time, and I know people are dropping off. So sorry if I'm going a little
No, no,
fast.
no, you're good. You're good. Plus, I
Okay.
get to see all the new faces. Hey, Zach. Hey, Serena. I can kind of.
Awesome. Um, and so I think we need to kind of like look at the everyday plaque and the everyday those unintended you know things that happen in our professional teeth every single day, because I think it's all rooted in this unconscious bias, right? The process by which the brain uses mental associations that are so well established as to operate without awareness, without intention, or even control. So for example, we've seen a lot of, gender reveals for parents in popular culture. And when parents reveal the gender of their unborn child, they may use colors to signify whether they're having a boy or a girl, right? And so what are the colors that we think of? For girls, we think of pink, and for boys, we think of blue. And these societal messages and norms have framed our values and thinking that we are now associating gender with a color. So those are just kind of examples of those messaging that we don't think about, but those everyday connections that occur. So let's look at the definition, because microaggressions are a manifestation of this unconscious bias, because they are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional. I think that's so important, right? Because sometimes they're unintentional because people are unaware, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults towards marginalized people. And so I have two videos that I wanted to kind of illustrate these microaggressions. One is more kind of a funny video, and the other one is also funny, but also has some education there. And you may have seen this one already.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. I'm Shasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Ah, Governor! What's all this then? Drop the morning to you. Let's go sporty. Double, toil and trouble. On the gap, beware Jack the Ripper. Bloody hell! Pip, pip. Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
I think if you were to ask maybe Asian friends,
Fish and chips, pheasants, clotted cream, fingers and mesh.
I'll pause there. I think if you were to ask Korean friends, this is something that happens to them very, very often, right? Where are you from? Where are you really from, right? Or even saying your English is really, really good, right? That assumption that because they are of Asian ethnicity that they were not born here, right? Here's another video that I think is a quick little cartoon that I think also illustrates microaggressions really, really well.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
oh, just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland.
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Can be shopping at
So
I live here too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a
You're
day,
so pretty. Can
Can
I
I
touch
touch
your
it?
hair?
Only this one. Can I?
is fucking annoying. That makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Ow, what a dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
It looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
So, you know, at first I wondered about the profanity, and then I remembered that I saw a picture of a member of your Atlanta End of Court with a Mike Tyson face tattoo, and I thought they'll be fine. So with microaggressions, wanted to talk about some examples of these microaggressions. And I really hate that we can't get into smaller breakout groups, because I think that it's a chance to really kind of share. So some of the examples are, I don't see color, right? And I think this is so important, because what I think people are trying to say when they say I don't see color, because there's, unless you're colorblind, I mean, that's impossible. I mean, you do see color, right? But what I think people are trying to say is that I strive to not allow someone's color or ethnicity or race to affect how I treat them as human beings, right? And so I think it's important to maybe use that phrasing, because when you say I don't see color, then how do you know how to see racism, okay? And if we're all allies in this work, I think that that's important to be able to recognize when those things happen. So other examples are, that's so gay. It's almost like you're not really blah, 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 blah. And as an African-American, I've heard that before. It's almost like you're really not Black, right? Because maybe I don't quote unquote sound Black, or I don't act Black due to stereotypical expectations. Another one, those either who are Asian or Hispanic, so people will ask, no, really, where are you really from, right? The next one is for people who are part of the LGBTQIA+ group, right? So who is the man in the relationship, or who's the girl in the relationship, right? If they have a same gender, same sex relationship. This is a big one. I think touching of a woman of color's hair without permission, I put no Nike, because Nike means just do it. And so I said, no Nike, don't do it, right? Another one is like, you're so opinionated, right? So when males say that to females, or maybe you're so dramatic. This is another one that I think is very, very offensive. You're all just the same to me, or you all look the same to me, right? For those who are biracial or multiracial, they will always get, what are you, right? Which is incredibly hurtful to hear. We speak English here, or your English is really good. You're so articulate. And I think that's a hard one, because people really are intending that to be a compliment, but it can be received as a surprise, right? You're so articulate, but I wasn't expecting you to be, so I'm surprised by that. Another one, you don't look Jewish. And then the last one, we're all just getting a little too PC, politically correct. And I think that is one that is incredibly hurtful for marginalized people, because in order to be quote unquote politically correct, you're just asking people to be mindful and respectful of your differences and to treat them with dignity and humanity. So I would have said, when have you witnessed a microaggression? If you were to think, pair, share in your breakout rooms, or when have you experienced a microaggression, or even, you know, if you wanted to be very vulnerable, when have you committed a microaggression? And so maybe I'll just take 5 minutes out. Hopefully, if I don't hear anyone for about a minute, I won't go suffer through that awkward 5 minutes. But maybe is there an example of a microaggression that I didn't list on the list that maybe you would like others to be aware of? And feel free to unmute yourself.
This is Jackie. I will say a microaggression that I experienced many years ago when I was at a law firm, and I understand are still occurring today, is when important meetings are scheduled at child pickup time. And I was very surprised not too long ago to hear this is still occurring at some of the major law firms here in town. And I was quite shocked.
Yeah. I think another microaggression that appears with parenting as well is that those who have adopted, right? So, you know, sometimes people will say, okay, well, when are they going to meet their real parents, right? And so I think that's just incredibly hurtful, because as much as you love your children, how that can be received is that you can only have a connection through blood relation. So thank you, Jackie, for sharing that too. Any others?
This is Amanda. I've definitely been referred to or assumed to be the paralegal or the assistant or the receptionist at least a dozen times in my career.
That's a big one, right? So automatically assuming because you are the female that you are not a partner or someone who is of a different support, right? So some of those societal stereotypes kind of creep in. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing that. I think a lot of people, a lot of women on this call would definitely say, me too, that struck a chord. Any others that we're missing or that would like to be shared?
This is Colin. I think a microaggression that I used to commit to female coworkers, I tend to be someone who interrupts. And I think the perception is that I was interrupting my female coworkers more often than perhaps male coworkers. And it took just becoming aware of the effect I was having on the folks in my team to realize what I was doing. And I think I've learned, I think I'm better at that, but I do think that's something that is relatively common.
Colin, wow, thank you so much for leaning into that, you know, vulnerability, to acknowledging some of the oops and the ouches that we make and how we've learned from that, right? Because I think in making those unintended slights, that can be received as being dismissive, right? And if you're sitting at a table where you recognize that you're only one of very few at that table, it took a lot to be in that room, right? And to make sure that that value, to feeling included and belonging, things like that can make a person feel that they're not included and belonging. So thank you so much, Colin, for sharing that. Any others? Okay, so I'm going to kind of break that down in terms of when you're experiencing a microaggression, when you've witnessed a microaggression, and when you've committed a microaggression. So I think it's important to talk about when you've experienced it. So something has been said. What are some potential scenarios of what you're thinking? Oh my goodness, did they just say what I think that they said? What do they mean by that? Should I say something? They'll probably just think I'm overreacting. I want to trust, but I've had this happen so many times. I feel so stressed out, hurt, and confused. I'm just going to let it go, right? So you may be thinking that, but what do you end up saying? And I think that the first part is really what happens, right? Silence. You don't say anything. Or sometimes we tend to call out instead of calling in. And calling out is like, I can't believe you just said that. That was so sexist. Da, 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 Colin. We're going to call him for a second. Instead of calling in and giving that feedback that ultimately Colin learned from, right? And was now able to be more conscious of those unintended acts of maybe interrupting, but also like reflecting on maybe I need to just not interrupt anyone, not just my female colleagues, okay? And let's kind of look at the witnessing, right? Because sometimes when you see something that happens, you may think to yourself, I can't believe this is happening. This is so not right. So you also continue to struggle with like saying something. Am I butting in? Is it really my business? Like if I do butt in, what will it help? And then you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so upset. I can't believe this is happening. So again, right, what you end up saying either is nothing at all, or again, calling out instead of calling in. And so I think this is important because we've all committed microaggressions, right? Even me as a diversity practitioner, like this is still like a journey and growing and just really working on that plaque. And I think that this is work for everyone. So sometimes, you know, when you've committed a microaggression and someone actually wants to call you in instead of calling you out, sometimes what you're thinking or what we think, I'll add myself, is the shock or surprise, right? Like, I don't even know that what I said was even offensive in the first place, right? Or even kind of like that shame or that guilt, like, you're a bad person. I can't believe that I just said that. So I'm so embarrassed. And even sometimes you get really defensive, right? And I think that in getting defensive and experiencing some of those other responses, we really want to work on this shame resilience, right? So a couple of strategies for that is like really listen with full intention. And try not to defend your intentions and really look at like and focus on those impacts. And don't respond right away. Like take a deep breath, you know, mentally acknowledge your feelings and what you're experiencing before you respond. And realize that your mistakes don't define you, right? Be worthy of their trust and of the gift. And I'll talk about the gift in the next slide. And again, prioritizing that impact over the intent and really apologize for real. With sincerity, because I think if you really apologize and you really mean it from the heart, that person will give you the grace and you can move forward. So again, going back to this growth mindset, like you are basically a good and decent person. And as with all of this, you made a really a mistake. And I think that you may not know, like Colin, sorry, picking on you again, that your mistake was impacting others. And so I think that we need to kind of look at when a person calls us in, they're really giving us the gift of information so that our intentions and our impact match to help make us as a better person, right? Not to hurt you, not to call you a bad person, but that gift of information so that you can grow well as well. So another way that you can kind of respond to that, if someone's called you in, is just even say, I really appreciate you telling me this, right? I'm so embarrassed that I said that. I'm so sorry for my words and actions and it made you feel that way. And no matter what I intended or why I intended or what I said, it hurt you and I'm really sorry. So that's really an example of apologizing for real, right? Another way, because you know, you could be kind of in that defense mode, is saying, you know, I'm really pretty overwhelmed right now. And I don't want to respond in a way that I'll regret. Do you think that you can maybe help me come up with a better way to handle the situation after I just take a couple of minutes to respond? I'd love to kind of circle back, right? And the last one, I wanted to go back to a moment and after you've kind of processed, when you circle back, say, I really wanted to go back to a moment that I don't think I really handled well. Can we talk about it? Because I think that it's important as you experience this feed forward, not feedback. I think feed forward is so important of a term because you really want to move forward and you really want to grow. So recognizing that dismissive attitudes are really harmful. Engage in that self-reflection to identify times that you may have been microaggressive in your personal and work life, right? If you know you messed up, don't wait for the intervention. Just apologize. And again, apologize for real. Right? And if you're really sorry, like work to improve. So if you've heard that feedback, like really, what are you going to do with it moving forward? Okay. and really building those authentic relationships. So it's not that awkwardness afterwards, right? To where you stop talking to the person because they've called you in. And again, seek those inclusive communities, those organizations and companies, and then experience that shift. Like start to use that windows, mirrors, and doors practice. Again, you can use that with marketing, you can use that with the website, you can even use that with like your organizational structure, right? Who has more windows than mirrors, right? And are the doors open to everyone? On the other side, right, if you've experienced a microaggression, like really acknowledge your triggers, right? So for example, you know, I think about that, it's almost like accumulated impact, right? Or a death by 1,000 cuts. You know, if you're a parent and you're driving with your kids and they say, Mom, Dad, are we there yet? And you're like, oh no, honey, we've got 8 more hours, right? After the 80th time of are you there yet? You want to throw them out the window, right? That doesn't make you a bad parent. It's just a trigger because we as humans, we don't like to hear and experience the same thing negatively over and over and over and over again, right? Find your villages of your bucket fillers, like really look at people who you can reach out to kind of unpack these, what just happened, and people to kind of give you a different perspective. Avoid making assumptions and labeling individuals. I think this is so important, especially now, because we are not operating at our very best selves, right? This pandemic has thrown us into unprecedented times where we are operating well past capacity, right? In addition to that, some of us are now at home homeschool teachers, right? In addition to working. So we may be tired, we may be stressed out, someone in our family, maybe our spouse has lost their job, or someone may have COVID, we may be even dealing with loss and people who are sick. So a lot of that compounded, again, is not allowing us to show up as our very best self. So being aware of that, okay? And recognizing that those slights are sometimes often unintentional. Sometimes they're really meaning it as a compliment, even though we know that it doesn't feel that way. And hopefully you'll feel comfortable to call them into a conversation to where you can unpack the situation so that you can give feed forward so you can grow, right? I think it's also important to, again, address the person first before you go to maybe a superior or direct report, because I think that there are so many opportunities for growth there and moving forward before you kind of go to the next level. So I'm in academia, and I know I always look at extra credit. So I've kind of listed some resources and books that I have personally read that I think that are really good. There are a lot of different resources out there, in addition to articles and YouTube videos, and sometimes it can be really, really overwhelming. So I kind of looked at as the top of the row is if you're really starting to just engage in this work, the top row is really good for you. Brene Brown, I love her. I think everyone loves her. Oprah loves her. She's on Super Soul Sundays often. And she really talks about leading with vulnerability and really looking at teams. I think that's a great book. She definitely talks about DEI principles throughout that book, but I think it's just one of the best books that I've read in terms of leadership. Inclusion by Jennifer Brown is another great one. The Person You Mean to Be, Whistling Vivaldi. Wide Awake is great for white allies. It does, I will preface that it does, it is written from a Christian perspective, as it is written from a Christian pastor. The ABCs of LGBT+, that's like the Cliff Notes. It's wonderful. Some of my students, or even the parents of my students that maybe have children that are exploring their sexual orientation, or just not even sure how to verbalize maybe transitioning, transgender. And it's just really a great book that helps them to articulate and name like how they want to identify. I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. That's also a great book about personal reflection. There are certain aspects of Christianity in it, but I think that it's an amazing source for both people of color and white allies as well. So The Color of Law is a great book. I mean, we're all here for Atlanta Inn and Court, so couldn't not have a book about law and how this relates to DEI and systemic racism. Inclusion Dividend is great for kind of a business look. And this bottom row is really kind of for heavier topics that require a different understanding, a deeper understanding of the fundamentals and some of the theories, because I think it goes there to the next level. So I would always recommend looking at some of the other resources before you dive right in, especially if you have a lot of questions. It's really good. Blind Spot, How to Be Anti-Racist, White Fragility is great. A Guide to Gender, that also breaks down even deeper into gender identity and also sexual orientation, transgender pronouns, all of that. And So You Want to Talk About Race? That book is, I think, extremely powerful. It definitely, as a Black woman, I think some of the things that we think, especially for microaggressions that we experience, maybe micro assaults, like she put down what we're thinking. So that is a book that definitely is not for a person who's just starting in it and could feel a little bit oppositional because she really takes it there. But I just wanted to provide that level of professional and personal development for those who want to continue this work. And last but not least, I just wanted to end with this quote that I think is so incredibly important, as well as acknowledge that this week is a week of celebration, especially for those who are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And I also want to say to those who are on the call that are of the Jewish faith, Shana Tova. I wish you a sweet new year as you celebrate Rosh Hashanah this weekend with your families. And I know that that was a lot, but I did a lot of cutting to try to get as much information as possible. If you would like to continue this conversation, whether at your firm or your company, I'd love to grow with you. Here's my personal information. But thank you so much for this time to share something that I am both personally and professionally passionate about, and I hope that you learned something today. So thank you.
I think Nicole and Matt have had to leave, but Brandi, thank you so much. That was wonderful with great and positive energy and some perspectives that that I think is good for us to all think about and remember. Having recently kind of discovered Brene Brown and been enjoying her podcasts as I try to get out and do my better than nothing exercise walks, that's been a wonderful perspective for me. I wonder, would you might take some questions if people have them, if
Sure.
the people who want to be brave and vulnerable?
Sure. I will say that in about 10 minutes, I have asked my husband to keep the children and dog at bay. So you may hear mommy, 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 because they're coming in. So sure.
This is Braxton. I have a question. And going back to the videos that you displayed about those who experience microaggressions or mosquito bites a bit more than others, how do you, at a certain point, a personal part of it becomes protecting yourself and your mindset and your mental. So how do you suggest, or do you have any suggestions for how persons who experience those mosquito bites, quote unquote, often deal with others who refuse to, I guess, let them lean in and, try to address the situation in a pulling forward manner?
Thank you, Braxton, for asking that question and being the first person to kick us off. Yeah, I think protecting your peace is extremely important. I would also ask you to look at some of your organization, or maybe it's a school. I'm not exactly sure if you're a student or if you are practicing, or that professional aspect of you. But I think that if you don't have business resources groups, or ERGs or affinity groups, now is the time, I think, to advocate and ask for that, because I think now companies and firms and schools are listening. I think you also have to assess at some point when protecting your peace, you find yourself protecting your peace more than being empowered to do your job, right? Or being empowered to learn. And I think that that's a personal choice that you'll have to have self-reflection, and which is the reason why I think it's important to have those bucket fillers, that village, because they will be able to really provide a sense of support for you, as well as help you walk through next steps if that's what you need to do. Thank you. And I hope that answered your question, Braxton. But I also will say self-care is very, very important. right? Because as a marginalized person, I would love to know, the utopia of wherever I can work, that none of this happens, right? So I think that as we're all learning and wanting to move forward, things are going to happen. But I think it's also important to recognize what is going to fill your cup when sometimes it gets depleted, right? Both professionally and personally. I would also say, really looking to see if you can have these conversations with someone at your company, at your firm, or at your school. Who are the people? Do you have a DEI person, right, to be able to advocate for you in these instances? Is there a person within HR or people in culture, or is there a person in leadership, if you're not in leadership or not a partner, that you can have these conversations with, that is not only a decision maker, but is also an ally as well. Thank you.
I have a quick question if we still have time.
Sure.
Yeah. So you talked very early on about inclusion of marginalized people in the structure, the power process, all of that. What's the best way to communicate, to get a feel of, especially in groups or organizations where there's maybe very small percentage of representation? To sort of, you were talking about balancing, including marginalized voices, but also not wanting to sort of make it seem like we're actually placing all the burden for fixing everything on the very few marginalized people in a particular organization or group.
Yeah.
What's the best? Yeah. What? Go ahead. Sorry.
No. Sorry for interrupting you. I think that a couple things, realizing that if you have a very small percentage of, and I'm going to say marginalized, maybe it's people of color, maybe it's those who identify with LGBTQIA+, those people are tired, especially maybe some of our Black colleagues right now. We are trying to come and show up the best way that we can at work, right? Given everything that's happened around us, and that's incredibly taxing, right? So I think that there's also another piece at looking at your structure and why you have the small percentage that you have, right? I think that is the meat of the conversation, is looking at your hiring practices, right? Where are you looking for diverse talent? Are you leading, or your institutions leading with this idea that we're looking for a specific type of person, one that thinks like us, maybe acts like us, but doesn't look like us, right? And I think that if we're okay with inviting that diversity of thought, we also have to be okay with inviting that diversity of identity as well, right? And it just is like nails on a chalkboard to me when people say, oh, well, we're looking and we're finding, but we just can't find a good fit, right? Or there's not enough diverse talent. And I'm a believer of, so make them, right? Go out there, find people. You already have people who are in your institution or in your company. What's the pipeline? How are we mentoring? How are we providing some of those tools, those professional development, whether it's a conference or whatever, so that they can be what we want them to be, right? Or maybe we shouldn't also want them what they want them to be, but collectively, like, the diversity and identity and diversity of perspective is a good thing. We need to evolve sometime as a company or a firm or a school, because like I said, in 5 years, they're coming, right? By 2040, 2042, people of color will be in the racial majority. So I think it's important that you start asking yourself, what does collaboration look like right now? How are we preparing ourselves to be able to collaborate with people who don't look like us? Because they are coming, and how are we equipping and preparing so that we can be sustainable? Because they're expecting it.
Hey, Brandi, this is Andrew.
Thank you.
See me, but I was gonna ask a question that would have been nails on the chalkboard for you, because, and this is maybe a problem that is, I don't know if it's unique to the people that are on this call, but there's a pipeline issue a little bit. And I work at a somewhat smaller firm, and we already have trouble attracting talent just as a general principle. And we would love to have more diverse candidates apply for jobs when we need people. And, you know, we've worked networks to get more diverse people. And I don't just mean racial diversity, I mean gender diversity. Like, we have a problem with that. And part of the issue is a lot of the times, just the people that are interested in us are like us, in that they are people that were engineers, and unfortunately in the science community, there is a lack of diversity. There just is. So I'm curious about what, other than maybe reach out programs, kind of like what you just mentioned, mentoring wise, what we can do and to be clear, I'm on the patent side of IP, so that's where it's a little bit more pronounced. What can we do to try to encourage diversity when it's almost like it's so systematic, the problem, that it's hard to deal with something that happened 15 years ago, or like it's going to happen, you know, if we need somebody now and the problem is there's not enough people with engineering degrees that are diverse or whatever and are lawyers, how can we resolve that problem? Because it is something that we talk about a lot in my firm, and we really have trouble. We really want diverse candidates, we really do, but we just don't get as many as maybe some of the larger firms do, just because of where we are on the pecking order of law firm.
Sure. I think that there are a couple of things, right? So really tap into the network here, right? Within this group, I see a lot of diverse faces, and maybe even pulling aside people and saying, hey, you know, we've networked, or we've had conversations before, like, this is something that's really important to us. Do you know anyone? Or how are you attracting, right? Even asking others, you know, because if it ain't broken, don't try to fix it. You know, sometimes you can even apply the same or similar strategies that other successful firms have. I think in addition, as a person who's always lived and been a part of PWI, so PWIs are predominantly white institutions, I look also to companies and institutions that, in academia, thank you so much, Margot, that are working on their white privilege, right? So even being able to highlight your own learning as not only like professional, but personally to be better in this work, because to me, that helps for a better work environment. I may not see myself represented, but at least they get it, and at least they're trying, right? And diverse candidates are out there, right? They really are. I think looking at HBCUs, making connections and networking and relationships with some of the professors that are there, right? So that you can kind of get a crack at the talent before they start looking, you know, looking at internships as well. And I think another person just talked about the Black tax, and that is so real, right? That's the idea of people of color feeling like they have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Right? Because I think that for different groups, things are important. I know for me, and maybe some of the conversations that I've had with other Black people, like when we get in a room, yes, we are counting, right? We want to see that representation. But I think also in retention is working on that environment, because you could have all the numbers in the world, but if no one's working to be more inclusive, working to kind of abolish some of these traditional systems that are not really serving certain groups, then they will leave as well. I hope that answered some of your questions, but I think that even reaching out, like I said, professors to some of these HBCUs, you know, looking at starting some of these potential like internships and programs, like establish a program within HBCU, you know, really be innovative and creative in that sense. And guess what? That will get out. Because then it's like each one teach one. Hey, you know what's happening with Andrew's firms over there? They're doing da 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 da, and then you'll have free PR. because then you'll have professors and people within that institution that will send talent your way. Any other questions?
Brandi, thank you so much, both for the presentation and the engagement and taking the questions.